Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the full moon in the third decan of Capricorn. I hope that you're having a wonderful afternoon and getting ready for the weekend, getting ready for Mars and Uranus to come together as I'm recording this. And yeah, we'll try to break down this full moon that we're going to be seeing in about a week or so you can be prepared and take best advantage of what the stars have in store for you. So we are going to make a few announcements first and then welcome a few friends in here. So, of course, if you are returning folks, you know that I'm a professional astrologer. If you're new here, hey, welcome. I have some offerings over at spencermichaud.com. I do these live streams every Friday, usually around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, daylight time, whichever time we're on right now. And I also do readings. So if you are interested in learning more about your natal promise, your mythological story that is written in the stars, take a look at spencermichaud.com and click on the Book Now button. I also do readings that are specifically geared towards your transits. And I have some offerings where if you have one specific question or issue that you'd like to talk out, I can help with that as well. I also do astrological tutoring if you are interested in learning more about how these systems work. I love teaching, and I would love to work with you. So check that out, spencermichaud.com. I also have a Cancer season sale going on right now. I'm going to be talking about the decans of Cancer, a 10-degree section of the zodiac that is more specific than we sometimes hear with regular sign analysis. And I have a number of webinars that I did in the past year or so, and you can find the decans of Cancer that I'll show you a few slides from today. That's 20% off in the store button at spencermichaud.com. I also have a beautiful magical partner named Tanya Andrews who has a business called Third Coast Mojo. So if you're wondering how to navigate some of the challenges of a Capricorn full moon and you need a little extra boost from Mars, a little get up and go, she has a wonderful series with exalted Mars and Capricorn elected. With these magical oils, we pick an election, which is basically a time when the planets are in fortuitous positions, and then there's a ritual performed where they draw the energy of those planets into what you see on the screen here. And she has a number of different offerings from a very nice election with Mars and Capricorn. So it helps kind of, plan out long term. If you're having trouble getting moving with Mars and Taurus here, this is a great thing to help you get down to business. So check her out on Etsy, Third Coast Mojo. And then finally, if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing here today, you can buy a super chat. This is a little $ in the chat on YouTube, and it goes a long way to supporting the work that I do here. It helps me to keep the lights on. I try to be a consistent voice for our community here, and that's a great way to support the work that I'm doing. You can also buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. All right, friends, announcements out of the way. Got some nice people stopping in here. Nice to see all of you. We've got KP1231. What's up, friends? Says, hi, Spencer, and all listening at work in Cleveland. This lunation is on my Mercury. Glad to be here. Well, so this one's going to be one that you're going to be feeling, KP. I think that when you have a full moon on your Mercury, expect some important communications coming your way, potentially. Rachel Fletcher is here from Roanoke, Virginia. Nice to see you, Rachel. I hope you're doing well today and everything is going well in your neck of the woods. Tarja is here. Says, hi, Spencer. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Tarja, joining in from Finland. We've got our Finnish crew stopping in, so it's nice to see you as well from across the pond. Siddhartha P. Johnny is here. Hello. Nice to see you, my friend. This is a new name. I'm glad that you're joining us today, so welcome. We're going to be hanging out, analyzing the full moon for a little bit. Tom is here. What's up, Tom? Namaste, Spencer, and everyone. Nice to see you, Tom. I know that I owe you an email, buddy. You sent me a nice email, and I haven't had the chance to respond yet, but I really appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're stopping in here today, and I'll be in touch shortly. Okay, friends, let's take a look at what we've got going on with this full moon in Capricorn III. So I'm going to bring this to the stage, so to speak. We're just going to take a look at this. So we are looking at the opposition of the sun and the moon in the final degrees of Cancer and Capricorn, what some might call the anaretic degree. So really important degrees and kind of a turning point before we see some significant shifts. This is going to be taking place on July the 21st, 2024 at 6:17 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Make the appropriate adjustment for your time zone. But we'll break down some of the pieces of this. This is the second full moon in Cancer season. We had a full moon in the first 10-degree section of Capricorn earlier in the season. And it's a little bit of a different vibe. That full moon was probably a little bit more about balancing our needs for nurturing versus trying to figure out where we want to build the structures in our lives, figuring out how to utilize our material resources versus our emotional resources. This full moon has a little bit of a different flavor. The third decans of Cancer and Capricorn have a lot of themes to do with scarcity versus surplus and sharing versus hoarding. The Sun in Cancer 3 also has some themes regarding feeling over something or full. Austin Cobbett calls that decan the overflowing cup. So we have all these emotions. We've satiated the body, and then it's like when you've had enough to eat, and you're just like, if I eat another bite, I'm gonna get sick. That's sort of the energy of Cancer 3, in my opinion, and it forces us to make a transition to find meaning in more of our spiritual life rather than just with physical reality. Now, when we look over at the moon in Capricorn 3, we've got a difficult place for the moon because the sun is going to be hosted by the moon in this particular full moon. It's not always the case, but in this one it is, because the moon is the ruler of Cancer. And the full moon in Capricorn 3, the moon is in its exile, although it does have some dignity by triplicity, which is a secondary dignity, which ancient astrologers would compare to having the support of your guild or of a community. So we may have some communal support at this full moon, even though the resources that we're dealing with may be more difficult to come by. The moon in this particular decan really shows us where our responsibilities lie. It really highlights themes of how we administrate power, whether in the collective or personally. It shows us the types of responsibilities that we've taken on, and hopefully we learn how to manage through being organized and being able to craft our own functional bureaucratic systems. I always compare this decan to like the government and dealing with bureaucracy. And and my definition of that is just systems that we have to work through they're in place and for structural purposes. Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, is a planet that likes to structure things. It slows everything down, and those of you who have dealt with any bureaucratic system in your life knows that's not a fast process when you're dealing with those organizations. It also, with the moon in particular in this decan, I mean, if you think about where Mars has its exaltation, it's in this decan, right? So we talked about Tanya's exalted Mars oil. It's similar to this energy is more supportive of martial actions. Now that's kind of at odds with the moon, right? It's a little disruptive to the moon. Oftentimes we have expectations to receive nurturing with the moon. If you, let's say you have the moon in Capricorn 3 in your natal chart, expectations towards the nurturing that we're hoping to receive unconditionally. So I see a lot of clients with Capricorn 3 moons who had parents or a parental figure in their life that didn't really allow them to just be themselves. They had to be a certain type of person to be able to receive their approval. And that can be very challenging and painful because in our early childhood lives, we are hoping and expecting for unconditional love. So that could be part of the story of this full moon. I think that, just I'm looking at an overview type of way. The moon is going to be out of bounds. And that is a condition of the moon where it is outside the normal path that the sun would take in relationship to the ecliptic. And so that's a fancy way of saying that this is a moon that is outside the jurisdiction of a normal social expectation. And when it's a full moon, already supercharged, filled with light, blossoming, we may get even extra emotional. So we really could be feeling a lot of our emotions and feelings, and we may be acting a little bit out of character. We may be feeling a little exhausted physically. I know when the moon's out of bounds, my body sometimes gets pushed to extremes, whether through working too hard or sitting too long or gardening too much, something like that. But I think that we'll have to pay attention to our bodies around this period of time so that we can, function at our best capacity. Now, the moon is going to be applying to Pluto. It's not in the same sign, but it's very close to Pluto. So this could also be bringing to light some repressed energy, some corruption. I think that Pluto tends to reveal that which we've cast underground or cast aside and said, I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to put that underground. And it doesn't go away. It just kind of sits there and festers and gains power. And then Pluto shows us that it's a problem still. So with it being in Aquarius, we have problems related to the collective, problems related to technology, problems related to the needs of the many versus the needs of the one. And we've been experiencing, as of today, oppositions with Venus opposing Pluto today. Earlier in the month, Mercury opposed Pluto. And then we're going to see the sun opposing Pluto shortly after this full moon. So a lot of themes of our own individual desires versus collective desires. Now, this is also an interesting spot because Pluto is going to retrograde back into these final degrees of Capricorn towards the end of the year and give us another chance to understand what needs to happen within our material reality and how we organize our society. Again, I will emphasize that this has a lot to do with governing bodies. So we may see some of that plutonic energy returning to our governmental systems. I don't think it ever left, but it may be highlighted. Okay. So those are some quick thoughts. I'm just checking in with the chat here. What's up, Robin? Nice to see you. Hi, Spencer and crew. Robin from Helensburgh, California. Excited to hear about the full moon Capricorn 3. Nice to see you, Robin. Hope you're doing well. Taria says this extra moon is coming to my Venus 7 minutes apart. Yeah, Taria. So this is going to be highlighting maybe your relationships, your desires, etc. Depending on where it is in your chart. This could be highlighting, something that you desire that could be part of need to be reorganized, and that there's something challenging about your personal desires, and there could be challenges around knowing when to say when, how much is enough, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. Devin says Mars and Luna are actually providing aid to each other in this moment, not like the opposition on the 16th. Yeah, I think on some level, although they are in aversion to each other, we will talk about the Mars and Pluto trine. But we're not quite into the aid part yet. I guess it'll happen shortly after that, unless I'm missing something. Yeah, we'll break that down. Oh, yes. Okay, Devin says, oops. I see Mars is in Gemini, but this time not a help. Okay, well, there we go. We cleared that up. But we will have a Moon-Mars trine that will happen very shortly after the full moon, so that there might be some fruitful conversations that happen potentially moving forward. And that's a good point, Devin, as far as seeing Mars moving into Gemini by the time this full moon comes along. Because Mars has been in a challenging position in Taurus, and it's applying to Uranus as we speak, as I record this on Friday the 12th, and it will be perfecting by Monday the 15th. And it's a little sticky time for Mars. And we might potentially, I hope, start to get some relief by the time Mars moves into Gemini, improving its condition just basically because it's not in one of the worst positions that it can be in. Okay, so let's keep going. So a couple other things to think about with this lunation. We've got Mercury right here at 26 degrees of Leo squaring Uranus. So this is another kind of potentially hairy part of this time period where we may be dealing with issues of pride. We may be dealing with trying to defend some beliefs that we hold very dear, whether they're spiritual, intellectual, etc. We could be feeling very passionate about something, a hill we want to defend, a position we want to defend. And that could make it very difficult it might be difficult to do so because there might be factors outside of our control that are greater than us. Uranus and Taurus is showing us that there's just greater forces than our own that we have to kind of deal with. A lot of my analysis of Uranus and Taurus has been related to things like climate change, things like our environment, where we have to make some compromises because of the changing weather patterns, etc. And we have to have some different choices that we make. I would also say that decan is really focused on remedying actions in the past that where we may have made some mistakes, whether it was through our own fault or through forces greater than ourselves. We're having to fix things. It's the let's fix something that's kind of gone awry. So we may have something that is going awry, maybe due to pride, maybe due to a fixed position that we have, that we may have to come off of that and be flexible. So there's that factor. We also are seeing the sun trining Neptune around this time as well. So there's the sun at 29 degrees of Cancer, trining Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces, a retrograde Neptune. We also have retrograde Saturn hosting the moon in this case, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this is an aspect that we've seen repeated with Mercury and Venus before they transit into or ingress into a new sign, into Leo. So we have this moment of like beauty, the beautiful illusion, the kind of moment where like, maybe feeling good, maybe feeling good in a way that isn't sustainable long term, because it might not be based on anything real. And we could be seeing this in relationship to leadership, in relationship to where our spirit is encouraging us to take action towards next. We may be having some luxurious tastes. This is one of the challenges of Cancer 3. Sometimes one of the difficulties in that decan is craving luxuries that are beyond your means. And when we have the sun trining Neptune, you might not be realistic about what you can afford or what you can't afford. And you have to kind of, try to think in a sober fashion around it. And the real crux of this aspect is that once that aspect passes, we're going to have the sun opposing Pluto. Okay, so it's like the wake-up call for each of these planets. Like we had Mercury trining, Neptune, and then it opposed Pluto. We had Venus trining Neptune, and then today it's opposing Pluto. And we're getting this wake-up call about things. But potentially after a very idealistic moment. So that is another part of the lunation. And then we have Mars trining Pluto. So another interesting aspect. So these are tight aspects too. These are not like wide things that we're looking at. We have a number of very tight trines and squares here, okay? Like Mercury is applying within 1 degree, Sun's applying to Neptune within a degree, and then Mars is applying to Pluto within a degree as well. So this Mars-Pluto trine at this full moon. Now, again, we talked about Mars gaining dignity in Gemini just based on the fact that it is not detrimented, that it is not hampered by Taurus. Mars doesn't enjoy being in Taurus because it's given the resources of Venus to try to carry out its desired significations, which, according to many ancient astrologers, is severing, separating, battling, contesting. And when you are giving it the resources of Venus, those are usually things that bring us comfort, security, harmony. So there is a disconnect between those. Now we have Mars in the domicile or home of Mercury. And Mercury is now providing resources for Mars. So this is where I often see Mars utilizes the resources of a sign or the significations of a sign to show us where conflicts are going to arise. So we've had some challenges within it's very literal sometimes too. It had some challenges within the cattle industry recently. We've had some challenges with security and resources, with hunger, famine. And then when Mars moves into Gemini, the resources that we're dealing with are ideas, that are communications, technology, commerce. Those are all things associated with Mercury and Gemini. The problem of having too many exploratory options, that could start to be painful. This is something we might all be experiencing on some level with Jupiter moving through its exile in Gemini, where we are having this explosion of options and it's kind of hard to get organized around it. I know in my life, and I won't dwell on this, but I've started collecting a game. It's for those who are actually interested. I have an interest in the Lord of the Rings, and I found this card game that has all of these kind of expansion packs to it, and many of them are out of print and very expensive on eBay. And I'm having to utilize all of my self-control to figure out how to engage with this in a healthy way and not one that's going to make me go broke on eBay. And it feels very Jupiter and Gemini, this explosion of options, learning all of these new complex systems and interactions, a desire for something that you want to bring something to completion, but there's so many different pieces to it that are difficult to corral. And I really think that that's what Jupiter does on some level. And for those who are interested, Jupiter is the ruler of my 5th house. So this is like a game or something that I'm seeking pleasure and entertainment in. But all of the pieces are scattered all over the world, right? And it's impossible to gather them all up right away. So I think that a lot of us might be feeling something like that. Depending on what Jupiter is doing in your own chart, it is breaking things into pieces. This is what Mercury is really good at, breaking things into smaller bits, especially in Gemini, that hopefully are digestible, but sometimes can be a problem. So when Mars moves into that sign, we may be feeling the tension of all of this attention splitting. And I'll tell you what, I'm someone that gets... when I have an interest and I have a passion, I'm a Leo rising, and when I get passionate about something, I'm kind of all in on it. It's hard for me to think about anything else. I get a little bit hyperfixated on my special interests, if you will. It's happened with astrology. It's happened with sports and games and things of that nature. Oftentimes, I'm able to find my center once again, though. I will get to a point where it starts to become a little bit painful, and then I have to rebalance and recenter myself. And I think we all might go through that period a little bit. One thing that I think could be poignant about Mars trining Pluto is understanding how splitting our attention in multiple directions could lead to some feelings of either alienation or of abuse of power or something like that, or corruption. where we're splitting our attention in so many different directions that it's not healthy for us. And how do you come back to center, right? I think of Gemini and its sister sign, Virgo, and the combination of those as breathing. Gemini is an exploratory house for Mercury, where we're gathering in pollen, we're gathering more information, we're seeing what our options are. But when we have the Virgo version of Mercury, and the essence of that sign is about how can you do something with it? How can you extract the essence and put it into a body to preserve it and pass it on as a legacy for the future? So I think what I'm doing with this is I'm being gentle with myself around my new exploratory interest. And this is true for a lot of other things too. It's not just this one particular thing. And then I'm allowing myself to integrate the information, and then and that requires you to pause. So you have to, like, when you're exploring, it's very easy to get overwhelmed with more and more and more information, more and more options, etc. But to do that in a healthy way, to do Gemini in a healthy way, take in the information. Don't feel guilty about that. Don't feel guilty about exploring. That's actually fun and part of play. I've been learning a lot about the scientific nature and necessity of play recently, and how healthy it is for our psyches and for our social interactions. And that's really what I'm hoping to achieve by learning about games and things of that nature. I'm not just playing games all day. I'm learning about how it's beneficial for us as human beings, because much of the world is so serious and heavy right now that being able to return and touch on some of that innocence that some of us felt, depending on your situation. I know that everyone's situation wasn't the same, but many of us felt as children before we took on the weight of the world, and before the heaviness of it or the world beat us down to the point where we just lost our enthusiasm for it. And I think reconnecting with play is really important. I think that might be part of the journey of Jupiter and Gemini as well. But take the time to integrate the things that you're learning. I think Mars-Pluto could be a nice moment for that, for learning how to eliminate the superfluous options. Because think about this. This is very important. Jupiter is going to bring us more options in Gemini. Mars is going to say, you can't explore all of those options. You're going to have to choose something. You can't have everything right away. It doesn't mean you can't have what you want eventually, but you can't have it all right away, or that's probably going to lead to overload and subsequently burnout. So I think that's another thing that's speaking to us in this full moon, with the Jupiter influence and Mars moving into Gemini and trining Pluto. So I'm just going to check in here with the chat before we break down the decans of Cancer and Capricorn. Tracy's here. What's nice to see you, Tracy. Hope you're doing well. Taria says there's an antitia or contra antitia with Mars to the luminaries. Do I see that right? Yes, that is a good call, Taria. So what Taria is referring to is, I believe, an antitia. Sometimes I get those two confused, but we have planets that are on either side of a solstice or an equinox. And in this case, Mars and the Sun are going to be on equal sides, potentially, of the summer solstice. So that's an interesting catch there, Taria, and not something I had thought about with this lunation. So maybe there is a secret conjunction with Mars and the Sun. So those martial themes could actually be more prominent than we originally were taking into account. Tarja T is here. Our other Tarja. We got two Tarjas. The two Tarjas from Finland. Nice to see you, Tarja T. Says hello from Finland. My moon is in Capricorn and ascendant is in Cancer. So this will be an angular full moon for you, Tarja. And this will be when we have an angular full moon or any angular transit, we tend to feel those more personally. So with yours, Tarya, this is going to reflect the just the random rising sign I have on my chart here, with themes of relationships versus personal desires playing out potentially. Tom says, part of playing is laughing. Yes, absolutely. I think that it's so easy to get bogged down in the seriousness of the world right now. And don't mistake my attempt to bring levity into the situation as a diminishment of the seriousness of the challenges we face as a community. But I do think having balance and pacing ourselves and learning how to laugh even in crisis mode is super important. So much of humor is an antidote to the traumas that we experience, to the crises that we experience. Much of stand-up comedy is based on really difficult experiences and learning to see some irony in it, learning to laugh at our follies and our foils. So I think that it's really healing. And it's a steam valve, right? It's something that can give us inspiration to keep going when things get tough. Learning to appreciate those things can really be insightful and useful to maintaining our hope. Paintings by Mare is here. What's up, Mare? Says hi from Maine, listening while working at home in my art studio. Oh, nice. I love your crystal blue hair there, Mare, in your very beautiful profile picture. I hope that you're finding inspiration for your paintings and things are going well for you. Yeah, Tom's pointing on the moon, Mars too. Absolutely. So those are some of the bigger aspects that I'm seeing with this lunation. So let's do something. Let's go and let's talk about the decans of Cancer. We want to start with the sun, because the sun is providing a conscious impetus for what the moon is collecting. The sun is radiating meaning. The sun is collecting it into a body and trying to concretize it here on the earth, so to speak. So we're always trying to figure out what is our inspiration at the full moon. The inspiration it's coming from the sun. That's where we have to really pay attention to where the sun is. So the sun's in Cancer 3. We've talked about feeling overwhelmed, feeling overly satiated. We've gotten our needs, our physical needs met. And then when we try to consume more, it could make us sick. It could be something where it doesn't bring the same satisfaction that it was before. The Book of Thoth calls it luxury. So maybe we want things that are beyond our capacity to bring in. But there's also scarcity involved in this decan. I think often we get faced with, seeing the difference between the haves and the have-nots. Like, for example, like I have Mercury in this decan, retrograde in the 12th house. And there were some times in my youth, it's the ruler of my second house. I've had some times of great abundance in my life, and I've had times of great scarcity. And seeing the difference between those two and seeing the difference in that, even in my youth, like two families, one was extraordinarily frugal and the other was very lavish in the way that they managed their resources. And those two things were always kind of at odds in my childhood because my parents were split up. And I'm sure part of the reason that they were is because they had a very different view of material reality. So learning to deal with those questions, like if we have more than we need, how can we share it with others? How can we become philanthropists? If we're taking on too much, how do we let resources flow through us? If we don't have what we need, how do we find what we need? How do we get our material needs met as well? But you can see in the tarot card associated with this deck in the Four of Cups that this person has already acquired 3 cups, and he's being handed this cup from a cloud or from the divine, but he's refusing. He's got his arms folded. He's like, nope, I'm good. I'm done. That's enough, right? So we could be feeling like we have enough. We have too many emotions. We have too many physical things that we've been acquiring. And what do we do with all of this? So divine discontent. Also can lead to some apathy or boredom, like we're feeling jaded, like we're over something. And what I have found having Mercury in this decan is that when I get that feeling of being over something, because as I mentioned earlier, I don't really do things halfway. If I'm interested in something, I throw myself into it with reckless abandon. And sometimes that leads to a little bit of oversaturation. And there comes a time where I'm like, I need to just really back off of whatever this interest is and find some balance in my life again. Then that can lead to some jadedness, right? It's the same thing. If you overdo something, even the sweetest treat can become toxic and you can make you feel sick. What I have found though is that sometimes that feeling of boredom, that feeling of I'm over it, instead of railing against it, sometimes I just have to sit with it, because oftentimes it is the moment before a breakthrough to a new passion. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with passion, within reason, right? Within balanced reason. But I do think that sometimes having things that inspire us is what makes life worth living. And if we're constantly just saying, well, no, we can't get interested in something, then our life is gray. It's not colorful anymore. So there is a ruler for this particular sephira in the Kabbalistic tree of life called Hesed, and that's a Jupiter. It's a Jupiter sephira. So Jupiter is bringing us a lot of something in Hesed. In this case, it's a lot of emotions, so emotional saturation. Luxurious taste, overfilled. The point of diminishing returns. That is a really great way of thinking about the sun in this decan. You know, we've gotten our needs met, and any more is just going to be overkill. So questions you can ask as far as what is inspiring you at this full moon. Where in your life are you feeling discontented? Do you need more, or have you had enough? What do you do with your surpluses? Is this the lull before a breakthrough? That's important. And then how can you reconnect with passion? And what comes next? One of the things that I think is an insight that is speaking really loudly to me right now is feelings of discontent leading to wanting to hoard material resources. Feelings of emotional emptiness leading to potentially an unhealthy obsession with some kind of material thing. I'm wrestling this myself, friends. Like I want to go and complete the set of cards in my life, right? This is literally it's like, oh, can I get enough cards to fill the hole in my soul? Probably not, right? And coming to that realization in the middle of a challenging experience in your life can help you to engage with something in a healthy way before it becomes a problem in your life. This is really, I think, when we're dealing with challenges of addiction, when we're dealing with challenges of figuring out how to engage in a healthy way with things that bring us pleasure. I'll tell you what I love to do. I love to collect things. There is a collector bug in me. And actually, I'm reading this book right now. I'm trying to remember the author's name. It's Stuart something, and he talks about play. He's a play expert, and collecting is one of the ways that we express play. You know, foraging is a really strong instinct. I have a really strong foraging instinct. So like it's a problem for me if I get on like eBay or something, I'm like foraging for like this hard to find version of something. And I have to be real careful about that. I have to say, what am I trying to fill with this? Like for me, that kind of hunting is fun. But how are we going to set limits with ourselves? I think the moon in Capricorn says you have limitations. You have to work within those limitations. You know, sometimes the limits are financial. Sometimes the limitations are time. Sometimes the limitations are within our relationships, structures, and boundaries. So here's one way to do this. Like, let's say you are a collector and you have, you know, only a certain amount of resource. How can you set a limit for yourself, a budget, and say, well, I'm going to be patient with this. I'm going to set this limit each month or each 3 months or whatever it is, so that it is you're working with time to be able to fulfill your goal, if that is a goal that you have. That's one way to deal with this energy. The other energy, way of dealing with it is saying, what am I really trying to achieve here? Am I trying to fulfill some kind of lack through a spiritual lack through a material means? For me, this particular game that I'm playing, I enjoy the lore of Lord of the Rings. I love being in the realm of Middle Earth. I love the escapism. I love the magic involved with it. I love the wizards and the hobbits and the ents and the environmentalism that is kind of a thread throughout it on some level. I love the camaraderie of hobbits. This is a cooperative game, so I play this with my partner. And I've been researching other cooperative games because what I had realized is that I'm a competitive person, and I was an athlete as a young person, and I was getting into things like fantasy football and things like that became a problem because of how competitive I was with my friends. Do you see what I'm saying? It wasn't satisfying because something that I was hoping to have us come together on drove us apart. So to me, connection is, I think, something that if I'm honest with myself, is cooperating with others and finding connection through play is something that is motivating me to pursue, this hobby. So really identifying the core of what you are trying to achieve through acquisition, through maybe going further than you had expected down a rabbit hole, which is easy to do with Jupiter in Gemini, and is a really important way to identify how to right the ship, so to speak. So let's go over to because we're dealing with the sun in this place, right? And let's go over to the moon, right? And the moon in Capricorn 3, and we'll look at what we're dealing with on the other side of the equation. Before I do that, do me a huge favor, friends. If you could like this video real quick, and if you are new here, please subscribe to the channel. That would be a huge favor that you could do for me. I'm going to stretch my legs for a second here so we can pace ourselves and get through it with our bodies intact. So get a good drink of water, stretch out a little bit. Make sure you're following me over on Instagram and Threads and Twitter if you're into that kind of thing. I have a Facebook page as well if you want to hang out over there. At Spencer Michaud is my Instagram handle and Threads handle. You can find me over at spencermichaud.com. And I'm just really grateful that you're hanging out with me on this Friday afternoon, or whenever you are listening. If you're listening after the fact, drop me a comment. Let me know that you were here. Okay, so let's talk about this moon in Capricorn 3. And I want to just welcome my friend Rachel from Ireland. Hope you're doing well, and hope we're helping give you something to listen to while you're cooking or something of that nature. So nice to see you. And Luna Storm 23 is here. Nice to see you with the purple unicorn avatar there. Very cool. Okay. Paintings by Mare says, I started paying myself $2 each time I work out. I have an Aries moon, so I need the movement. My North Node in Capricorn in my second house. Sag rising, loves overindulging, working on discipline. Yeah, Mare, and discipline is tough sometimes. That's why we call it that, because sometimes it involves doing things that don't come easy or natural to us. And especially with a Capricorn, flavored lunation like this, we may have to honor Saturn. And Saturn says here, you got to be realistic about what you're doing here. All of these trines with Neptune could be bringing this fantasy to us. And we're getting these wake-up calls. And that part of this full moon is I think, a wake-up call on some level. But I think the essence of discipline is consistency, in my opinion. It's something where like you're doing, you're finding a way to motivate yourself to do the things that might be hard. And for a lot of us, like myself included, like I work from home, so there's, getting enough movement and things like that. Like I'm not out as much in society walking around as much. I need to force myself to go for a walk every day and like get up and move around. And this is becoming more and more common as we have people that are working remotely and working from their computers. So yeah, it's super important though, because we are physical beings, and as we get further and further into the, I guess you could call it the air age, I think we need to be able to refocus on having a healthy balance between our intellectual selves and our physical selves. And they're really not, they don't need to be at odds with one another. We just need to move around every once in a while, right? Okay, so let's talk about this moon in Capricorn 3. So the moon in Capricorn 3, you can see here, we have the Four of Pentacles as a tarot card that is associated with this 10-degree section of Capricorn, the final 10 degrees of Capricorn. Book T calls it the Lord of Earthly Power. Book of Thoth just calls it the Lord of Power. Austin Coppock calls it the Throne. And here we have a solar decan, all right? This is interesting because that previous decan of Cancer that I was talking about, third decan of Cancer, is ruled by the moon. There's a spirit in that decan called Hecate, who is the goddess of the crossroads. So we might find ourselves at a crossroads. We might be having to go into the dark spaces in our life and try to illuminate something that we need to bring back from our metaphorical underworlds, just like Hecate helped lead Demeter to find Persephone in the underworld as torchbearer. Now with Capricorn 3, we have a daimon or spirit called Tolma, which basically is it translates to boldness, like taking a bold action of some sort. And this is a solar ruled decan. So we have opposite decanic rulers. One is very body focused. The other is maybe more spirit focused on some level, because the ancient astrologers thought of the moon as related to physical reality and the sun related to more of a spiritual consciousness potentially, although we could make arguments for both of those things. So we see administration of power, themes, CEOs, kings, thrones, right? Feeling the weight of our responsibility. We have a solar decan in a Saturnian sign. So you're getting an awareness of all the heavy burdens that you are carrying. So this could be another theme we're experiencing in the Capricorn 3 full moon. Just a huge awareness of the burdens that we're carrying, not only physically but emotionally as well. Feeling the weight of our responsibilities. Enslavement to the material world. One of the favorite stories I see associated with this decan is King Midas, someone who begged to have everything he touched turn to gold, and then realizing that the material things that he desired weren't going to make him happy, and actually took away some of the things that were his true wealth, like his family. He turned his family to gold, and you can't converse with a gold statue of your partner or your child, etc. So it is a warning. Just as we had Hesed in the Sephira related to Cancer 3, we also have Hesed in another different world called Asya, which is the material world. So we're having an abundance of material resources. And here you can see a king on a throne who is hoarding his pentacles, right? So there's also a warning about hoarding resources. We may have an excess of resources here. I have found people who navigate this decan well, if they are balanced, they can be very generous. But their generosity is sometimes providing material security for others. Whereas someone who has strong influences in Cancer 3 may be an emotional supporter for people. So think about how that could play out. Like if you have Capricorn 3 in your chart, you may be someone that feels the weight of being responsible for other people, but especially in a material fashion. So gathering wealth, okay? But Hesed and Asya could be hoarding the flow. When we hoard resources, we stop the flow of abundance, all right? Resources are like an energy stream where you open up the dam to let it come to you, and then you let it flow from you. And if you just hoard it, it floods, and you're flooded, and then it stops filling up, right? So we have to be able to be generous with this moon in particular as well. So questions you could ask yourself related specifically to this decan. What responsibilities have you taken on? How do you manage your power with grace, right? And especially with the moon applying to Pluto, we could have some awareness of ways that we utilize our power in a corrupt way. All of us have blind spots. All of us have pushed down some things in our life, unless you're some kind of very advanced avatar, and we can argue about that. Everybody still here, I think, has some things to work on. But I think that it can give us an awareness of things that we've repressed. So how can you utilize your power gracefully without trying to manipulate others, without trying to impose your will on others? This could be something else too. And we might be seeing this in the collective too, of how people in government agencies are either imposing their will or exposure of a corruption in something like that as well. So are you hoarding resources or allowing them to flow? Do you own your possessions or do they own you? That's an interesting one. I'm just laughing at this because the theme of the day, just my own experience, just with my own collecting tendencies, is sometimes when I get on a collecting jag or whatever it is, one of the main problems I have is, where do I put it? How do I organize it? How do I understand what I have and what I don't? And like a thing like a collectible card game, how do you store it so you can find what you want? You know, like those are all questions that could come up too. And sometimes what you find is that, especially if you have some of these Four of Pentacle hoarding tendencies, if you can't move around your space anymore, those possessions are owning you. They're blocking your flow. If you have, this is a problem I've had with books in the past. If you have too many books where you just have run out of shelf space and they just start to make piles in your office or on your flat surfaces, that's when it becomes a problem, and you have to figure out what to do with that excess, surplus, etc. So it's very easy for possessions to be something that we are become enslaved to. I think about the concept of being house poor is really interesting. A lot of people try to afford either a home or like a car or something like that they really can't afford, or is too expensive for them. And then every waking moment they're going and working to be able to afford to live in that space, having difficulty enjoying the thing that they are trying to pay for. This has been something that I've been very aware of from a very young age, that I didn't want to get into that type of situation. But it is something that it can be hard to not get into that kind of situation with the way that society is trending, with like inflation and late stage capitalism and things of that nature. Everything gets more expensive, and sometimes even just affording a modest home can get us in situations that are difficult. So I think that it is important to take stock of what you are trying to surround yourself materially, and is it worth the work that you're having to put into it to afford? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes there are basic needs, or sometimes there's things that do bring us genuine security and joy, and they are worth working hard for. So don't ever let me stop people from working hard if there's something that you want in your life and you want to be able to have it. But it is important to take stock every once in a while and really understand if we need it or not. There's needs versus wants, right? And then asking yourself, how much is enough? It's very easy to get caught in the trap of accumulation. And this is something that we see a lot with people who are in like the oligarch billionaire class. They have plenty of resources, but they're not addicted to the material things necessarily anymore. They're addicted to the chase. They're addicted to winning. They're addicted to like accumulating. Because many of these folks have more money than they could spend in 100 or 1,000 lifetimes. But it's more about power, right? So how can you realize in your life when you've gone beyond that point of diminishing returns and are trying to capture more, not necessarily because you need it, but because you want to feel empowered, or that you're addicted to that chase or that foraging aspect? And then finally, is this throne a palace or a prison? Again, it goes back to, are your resources working for you? Are they tools that you can utilize to live a balanced physical and spiritual existence? Or are they something that you have become enslaved to? And again, like, there is a lot of difficult situations that we get put into in a society like America, like Western civilization, where we are constantly being bombarded with manipulative messaging and advertising that specifically tries to tell us that we are not enough, that we need to buy something or acquire something to be complete. It's very insidious. And I think that the thing that to keep in mind is, how can you get to the point where you are satisfied with who and what you are outside of those social expectations? That's the only way we as a community are going to find homeostasis once again in our relationship with this beautiful, amazing, generous planet. Okay? It's super important, because this very toxic way of making us feel less than is going to have, and is having, dire consequences for the future of civilization. Okay, let me check back in with our chat here. Let's see. Nice to see you, Stephen. Hope you're doing well, my friend. Rachel says, I'm close to someone with their moon in Capricorn 3. This describes their supporting role so well. Yeah, and this isn't... There are people that are wonderful folks that have the moon in this decan. I would say oftentimes they've had difficult childhoods because a parent really put a lot of pressure on them. And I think that it can speak to an absent parent sometimes. So they've had to fend for themselves, and sometimes their material security was threatened as a young person. So they are often feeling like they want to provide that structure for others that they didn't get when they were younger. So that's something to consider as well. Stephen says, I put my money in a bank with a high interest rate. Well, I hope that that's paying dividends for you, Stephen. Yeah, I mean, investing is something that, Capricorn 3 could be a healthy outlet for that. Although I would balance investing and things like that with sharing with your community. Rachel says, one of the harder things to let go of are books, but a thorough shelf clearance is so liberating and allows us to see the truly treasured tomes. Yeah, Rachel, I am overdue for that. I'm a book collector, and sometimes I have, like the oligarchical billionaires who have more money than they can spend in one lifetime, I have more books than I can read in one lifetime. And it is really satisfying to be able to sit down with a book. Right now I'm really sitting down with this Braiding Sweetgrass book. I love this book, and it's helping me really deal with some of these challenges I'm speaking towards today, with knowing when enough is enough, and realizing that the earth is so generous if we allow it to be, if we work with it, if we respect the reciprocity with it. It can be beautiful. Just as I was joking about this the other day with a client, that the earth feeds us, but we will feed it. When we die, our bodies will return to it and become something else that it will create new life from. So there is a reciprocal relationship with nature if we if we acknowledge it, which isn't always a fun acknowledgement, but it's a beautiful one, and it's one that can help us be more comfortable with death, knowing that we are a part of something greater than ourselves. Stephen says, I just find more crevices to place my books. I don't let books go. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough for a lot of us, right? It's tough for a lot of us to deal with things that we cherish, especially knowledge. It's easy to hoard knowledge. It's easy to say, well, I don't know enough. And that's one of the hardest things to reconcile sometimes, is feeling like, when have we learned enough? And we just have to surrender to the process. Rachel says, I used to feel that way, Stephen, and I've also realized that many of books belong to a particular stage of our lives, and we are allowed to appreciate that time and let them go. That's perfect. I love that, Rachel. Spoken like a true Aquarius, if I'm not mistaken, right? The detachment part of it is interesting. Stephen says, I should live in a library. Yeah, I love the library. Since the pandemic started, I was like, well, I don't go to the library that much anymore. I just need to make my home a library, which sometimes can be difficult if you don't have places for it, right? Taria says, I have piles of books, so Jupiterian. Yeah, I have Jupiter in Virgo, so like my attraction to knowledge that's where sometimes I find excesses in my life, right? Rachel says, just realizing the book worship Jupiter connection. Absolutely, right? Okay. Right. Rachel says, yes, they've been incredibly responsible and hardworking from a young age. This is in reference to their Capricorn III moon friend, and also incredibly generous. Yeah. And not every person that lives in the Capricorn III area is generous, but many of them are. Like we have good and challenging people, or functional or dysfunctional people, in every single sign in Decan. They all have their pros and cons. So, yeah. Rachel says, I ordered a copy of Braiding Sweetgrass as a leaving present for a dear friend, and now I'll have to gift myself one too. Oh, that's beautiful, Rachel. It's a great book. It is really helping me to understand a sense of meaning and purpose, especially through the author's journey through motherhood and the transition from, she was a single parent and a lot of her life was dedicated to raising her two girls, and then what that means when they leave and go to college, and how she finds meaning with it. And one of the things I really liked, like in the book, she talks about trying to remove some of the organic matter from a pond to make it swimmable for her children. And what she realizes when she starts this is that this is going to take many years. And it actually took her about 12 years. And she was trying to help her children because they wanted a place to swim. And she kept going out and removing more and more of the organic matter. And by the time that she had removed enough to make it swimmable, they were off to college. And the irony of that was not lost on me, the interesting thing. But what I thought was beautiful about that is that many of the things in their upstate New York farm that they enjoyed doing, like tapping maple sugar trees and making maple syrup, a lot of the equipment that they were using was left to them from previous generations of owners. And the way that she might be taking actions, maybe not just for her children, but for her grandchildren and for their grandchildren, or for the next generation of stewards that come to that home and to that land. And I think that's really important, because as we think about legacies, we move from the personal to the intrapersonal, to the transpersonal, right? And I think that we can mother an individual, and then we can start mothering our communities, and then we start returning that energy and mothering the earth itself. And it's such a beautiful way to not only to age, but to understand the different stages of life and how we can find meaning even when we're experiencing a loss. And our culture doesn't do a great job at helping us understand those transitions. We have a youth-obsessed culture that ends up discarding people when they get to a certain stage in life. Although I will say a lot of the power brokers in our current society are aging and trying to hold on to their, pentacles with every ounce of their, fingernails. And it's tough to witness. So there is that. So it's kind of a weird paradox that we have this youth-obsessed culture, but also that the most powerful people are of a certain generation at this point. But I do think that, like everything that's happened previously, Father Time is undefeated, and we will eventually see these transitions moving forward. Rachel says, hoarding knowledge. That is one of the hardest things in contemplating death for me. I fear losing all of that knowledge. You and me both, Rachel. That is one of the hardest things for me, thinking about transitioning into a new reality or a new dimension of consciousness or whatnot, is losing all the things that I've learned or things of that nature. But I think if we think about it now, honestly, I don't have much idea about what happens after we die beyond the fact that my body is going to return to the earth and feed something else. But I think that if we do have souls, and I think we do, there is some kind of different type of knowledge that we are gaining rather than the knowledge that we gain from books. A soul knowledge is probably a little bit different than the technical knowledge that we get from just this material world. But I do think that these experiences are important, and I hope that those carry on after we have passed. But that's the great mystery, isn't it? Rachel says, Aquarius indeed, my Pisces Mercury does benefit from that detachment. Good, Rachel. Says, it looks like a beautiful book and one that we need greatly at this time. I've read a lovely review recently by an Irish writer who highly recommends it. Yeah, I love it, Rachel. It's right up your alley if you love connecting with nature, if you enjoy science, if you enjoy plants. And it's just a really nice reflection on belonging in community. I think that's one of the things that's really helping me out right now with it. Stephen's got the opposite. Mercury in Aquarius, Sun in Pisces. It's hard to detach here. Isn't it interesting how we switch one placement of those planets, and we have someone who's very detached and then someone who has difficulty with it. So yeah, it's fascinating to see. Robin says, I too collect books. I literally have a library in my house. I have 5 large bookcases and 6 smaller ones. Yeah. I mean, it's okay to have some things that you enjoy. I don't begrudge people that. And I think that of the things that we could collect, books are kind of a nice thing. And it's becoming, honestly, we need to continue to read because it's so easy these days to not read because we're inundated with things that want to get us dopamine addicted in a different way. There's a lot more flashier ways to engage with information these days than a book. But I do think that the stillness and the quiet of a book is something we shouldn't lose. That experience of being able to be in that world and be in that space without being manipulated by some kind of noise machine or whatever it is, I think is really important. So I will never begrudge people for collecting books. Taria says, my Mercury is in Cap 3. Too many books. It's a theme here with our astrologers. That's why I love all of you, because you all are super intelligent people, and it's probably because you're readers. You know, readers are leaders, and I think that it's super important to keep that. Greedy for knowledge. But eventually we'll have to let go of that too. So that's something to consider. Yeah, we all have books that we can't fit, right? I do think that what Rachel is talking about weeding things out sometimes, I think is good. I had a few boxes of books that I donated to the public library not that long ago. And my rationale was, if I donate them to the library, they'll be there for me and I won't have to store them, but I could access them whenever I wanted to. So there's different ways to go about it for sure. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the host of this lunation. Let's go back to the chart. And you can see here, we've talked about the moon in Capricorn, and let's talk just a little bit briefly about Saturn in Pisces, which is hosting the moon. So we do have a sextile relationship, although it is separating. And Saturn, the host of Capricorn, is retrograde. So there could be a review process about how we find meaning in our lives. And I think specifically with Moon in Capricorn III, how do we find meaning in our possessions? How do we find meaning in our material resources and the things that we pursue, that we hoard, etc.? We've been, we are admittedly a group of book hoarders here. And how do we find meaning in it? What meaning does that bring us? And again, like I'm someone who I've done a few KonMaris in my life where I've gone through and like had to really evaluate whether something brought me joy or not, and then tried to get rid of it. I'm someone too that has difficulty with paperwork. I have like piles and piles of paperwork that I need to sort through. I always think I'm going to need some like old bill or something weird, and And whenever I go through and throw away half of it, that actually feels really good. You know, you want to save the things that are important, but you got to engage with it every once in a while. So taking what's the word? Sort of an evaluation or an audit of things in your life, I think could be really important. And feeling like, do these things bring you joy? Are they a reflection, like Rachel was saying, of who you are today rather than who you might have been in the past? Okay, that's important. Here's the other thing. You get rid of a book that doesn't resonate with you anymore. If you truly, truly need it, you can always find a way to get it again. I really believe that. If something, you know, we give something up, then we regret it, you can always get it again. I mean, there's certain things that may have, you know, once in a lifetime, sentimental, you know, hard to get type of thing. But most of the time, that is not true. So I think that it's important to be able to do that from time to time. Just take a spiritual audit of your material possessions. Stephen says, if an old bill is 10 years old, it is no longer needed. That's probably a good way of thinking about things. So it's time for me to do the paper audit for sure. So keep in mind, we might be reviewing how we find meaning in our lives. And also, I think that Saturn retrograding in Pisces can show us our limitations around, I think specifically around how we may overestimate our abilities. And with Jupiter, its host, coming into a square with Saturn in the coming months ahead, we may be overestimating our ability to hold a lot of information, you know, to hold too many options. And Saturn's going to say, you're going to have to let go of some of those options, desires, explorations. You might have to let go of a few boxes of books. You know, you might have to let go of a few idealized notions of what you want to achieve. Like, here's the thing. Time is limited. It is a limited resource. And when you are making choices with your possessions, what you're really doing is you're making choices with your time. When you are purchasing things that are outside of your capability to afford, what you're doing is you're trading future time for that resource. And you have to ask yourself if it's worth it. And again, some things are. Some things are trading our time and our freedom for. Other things absolutely are not. And other things we will regret in the moment, in the future, our lack of restraint in the present. Okay. Let's go through a few little things that might be happening around the full moon very briefly. And then we'll end the day with an I-Ching and with an animal. So the first aspect that we see, and I'm going to put that on the outer rim here, the outer ring, is an opposition with Mercury. So this is a technique that ancient astrologers would utilize to see when the moon escaped from the bond. So when the moon was within 15 degrees of an opposition or a conjunction with the sun, it was thought to be kind of contained by the sun. And when it escapes from that bond, then we start to see movement in our actions once again, our ability to manifest or whatnot. So in this case, we have this opposition between Mercury and the moon as the first traditional aspect that we see. So there could be some tension when we really start to integrate the realizations that come up at the moon-sun opposition. So these could be thoughts around how we stand our ground versus how we move on. We've been talking about this a little bit here today. Many of us are stubborn and passionate about our hoarding our knowledge, having books. There's been fear expressed around, do we carry that knowledge with us from lifetime to lifetime? And eventually we may have to let go of some of this. I think about if I utilize the world that I've been into lately, I think about Frodo after he has experienced the journey of taking the ring to Mordor. And he can't return to the Shire in the same way. He's going off into the west with the elves. He's been changed. There's no way that he can go back in, because he knows what he knows, maybe on a soul level. And that really, to me, reflects the Aquarius 3 energy, where we're saying we have to go off into the unknown. We can't stand our ground anymore because we've been changed by an experience. That's where the detachment part of Aquarius can come through. So we may be having questions about, do we stand our ground and hang on to a certain belief system, whether it's knowledge, material things, etc., or are we going to move on and embrace the unknown and become more detached? And there will be tension with Uranus. There might be some things that are just outside of our control that we don't necessarily have answers to yet. And we have to surrender. Saturn in Pisces asks us to surrender on some level. And I think patience is really the key also. Now we get to the next day here. Well, simultaneously as that first aspect is perfecting, the sun's making an opposition to Pluto. So again, this is one of our movements where we see a planet that was previously trining Neptune, and then it immediately opposes Pluto. So it's really just a wake-up call. It's really just like that grand illusion that you were surrendering to, that beautiful ephemeral moment, well, that's over now. And now you have to decide how your personal desires are going to fit in with the needs of society. All right. There may be some challenges with the sun opposite Pluto with visibility versus homogenization. You know, oftentimes we think of Leo as trying to individuate and become a singular point of consciousness like the sun within a sea of stars. And there may be challenges to that with the needs that we have as a community right now. One of the biggest things that we have as a community right now is the ability to share with one another so that we can keep this beautiful mother healthy enough to keep providing a habitable space for us. And I'm referring to the earth. And that might mean that we have to learn how to share with one another rather than hoarding, whether it's knowledge or resources or land or whatever it is. So those are the things that we might be running into, those things, our own personal desires versus the needs of our community and how difficult that might be. Okay. We're also going to see the moon moving into Virgo. Okay. I'm sorry, not the moon. Mercury ingressing into Virgo. That's what I meant to say. Saw the M on the screen and it just came out of my mouth. But Mercury is going to ingress into Virgo on the 25th. So this is going to hopefully start to alleviate some of the tension of the Mercury-Uranus square and the opposition between the moon and Mercury that we had as the first aspect. And Mercury gains a whole mess of dignity. Okay, it is in its domicile and exaltation in Virgo. So a lot of the mercurial tendencies, ability to think clearly, ability to separate fact from fiction, all of those things are going to be enhanced with Mercury in Virgo. Now the challenge is it's going to be moving into a square with Mars. So we are probably going to feel a little bit restless and maybe a little bit of paralysis with our options, but hopefully Mercury in Virgo is going to help us to figure out what is really truly important and what isn't moving forward. So I'm looking forward to that. Although I will say this, Mercury is going to start slowing down as it ingresses into Virgo. And in the very beginning of August, we have a Mercury retrograde at about 4 degrees of Virgo. So this territory that Mercury is moving into, the third decan of Leo coming up soon, is the point that Mercury is going to retrograde back to. So many of the decisions that we make around this full moon, potentially, we're going to have to review later as Mercury retrogrades in the beginning of August. And then finally, we have the last quarter moon on the 27th. Okay, so here is the last quarter moon in Taurus. Right, we've got a 27th or 28th or so. At about 5 degrees of Taurus. Yeah, late on the 27th. So last quarter moons generally are somewhat of a period of reevaluation. You can call it an existential crisis if you want, but we may be trying to integrate all of the lessons of the previous lunar cycle so that we can move on to the next lunar cycle. So in this case, we have a solar spotlight on performing, on our need to be visible, on the pressure to perform. I think that this is around the time the Olympics start, so we could be seeing a lot of our international athletes feeling the pressure to perform. It's a Saturn-ruled decan, the first decan of Leo, so Sun-ruled sign, Saturn decan, responsibilities to shine, and the culmination of years and years and years of work. But the moon in Taurus, this is very close to the moon's degree of exaltation, a really fortunate place for the moon. So the moon's in its exaltation, the sun's in its domicile. So they're both very powerful. But we could feel pressure to perform because of the need to bring in resources potentially. So this could really be about how do we balance our need for visibility, for respect, for authenticity with our material planning moving forward. So that's something to consider as we see the last quarter moon in Taurus 1. Okay, so that is what I have for you for the full moon. So let's, as we are apt to do, let's do a I-Ching. The I-Ching I got for you today was enthusiasm, number 16. So this also translates to stirring up, inspiring others, broadcasting, undertaking, preparing for something, providing for others, planning ahead, but also enjoyment and delight. So this is something where our enthusiasm, our passion's getting aroused, and how do we share that enthusiasm with others? How do we get others on board? How do we make music with others? So there's Jack Balkin talks about the metaphor of this decan being about making music with others, like delighting in the symphony and the harmony that we make with others. So there's a few changing lines here. The first changing line that we see at the bottom says enthusiasm expresses itself, misfortune. So this is encouraging us to be careful about exploiting an important connection we might have, not flaunting our advantages, whether they're material or otherwise. Like if we have an important connection with someone, like being humble about these things rather than say, oh, look at this person I'm connected to, etc. And not using your enthusiasm for self-aggrandizement or self-promotion, and putting your energy towards collective action. Utilizing your enthusiasm to unite people rather than to divide them. We have some leadership in the Western world right now that are using their charisma to divide people rather than to unite them. And that's very frustrating as someone who values peace and cooperation, to see our leaders that are trying to divide one another. So try to utilize your voice and your word to bring people together. The third line is changing as well, and it says, looking upward, wide-eyed with enthusiasm brings remorse. Hesitation brings remorse. So this is telling us that we can't necessarily rely on others for motivation. Oftentimes we want someone else to inspire us, we want someone else to show us the way, etc. And this is asking us to become more self-reliant. Sometimes there are moments that the I-Ching tells us to wait. Other times it says, waiting is over. It's time for you to do something about this. And if we hesitate too long, the kairos moment, the opportune moment, can pass. So this might be a time to take action on something that's important to us. So if you don't want to lose your independence, you might have to take an action individually that will help support that, right? If we rely too heavily on others, that can lead us into a continuing cycle of servitude. So that is all changing to hexagram number 55, which translates to abundance, zenith, fullness, okay, full moon, right? Splendor, plenty, being generous, acting decisively, living in the present, making the most of the good times. This hexagram also has been, compared to just being able to do the most with what you have in this moment, because there will be changes ahead, right? This is the peak moment, and how can we make sure that we're utilizing the abundance that we have right now in the best possible way? Are we being responsible with our resources? Because if we have a surplus right now and we fritter it away on something that isn't going to support us long term, we might not have those resources. We might not have that security moving forward. So how do we be responsible with what we have? But how do we share what we have with others so that we can keep the flow going rather than stopping it up like a dam? And that is very interesting to me, because we have a animal that we've seen before in this is the chipmunk. The animal spirit for this full moon is the same animal that we got for the astrology of July. So this theme is coming back to us. And the chipmunk really talks about acting with confidence. They are very mobile and agile. They are representative of making quick decisions. They also are great at organizing their dens and storing up for the winter. So this might be a warning to us to be more frugal with our resources, to understand with what we have and to not become excessive with our tastes, but also to share with others and to support one another. I think that as a community, we can be stronger than as just individuals. And I think that it allows us to achieve more together than we could individually. And I will say this too, the resources that you gather for a difficult time or a metaphorical winter do not always necessarily have to be material. I think that our social connections are very valuable as well. That is a tangible resource, because in a moment of crisis, in a moment of like a natural disaster or something, you can prepare till the cows come home, but there might be some things that you haven't predicted that you need to rely on your neighbor for help. And facilitating and fostering those relationships can get you out of a sticky situation. So make sure that you're able to do that at this time. Okay, so look at this little face stuffed with peanuts, right? He looks like the Four of Pentacles, right? Holding on to his hoard, his stash of nuts. So it's funny. All right, my friends, that is what I've got for you today, right? And I appreciate all of you being here. I'm so grateful for you as a community here. I'm glad that we have readers. Don't ever let me shame you for reading a book, like maybe. But I think that as a check and balance for even my own life, maybe we can agree to encourage each other to read the books we have, and maybe pass them on to someone when we've gotten what we needed from it, and let them experience the joy of discovery that's in that book as well. One of the greatest things and feelings is giving a book to someone else. One of the things that Braiding Sweetgrass book, I think, talks about is that we experience giving the same chemicals that we experience in the brain for receiving, we experience when we give something to someone else. And I thought that's really fascinating. I'm not sure if it was in that book or if it's just something adjacent that I was reading, but the feeling of reciprocity, the giving, we are giving, it fulfills us in the same way. So keep that in mind, that there's two parts of that cycle, the receiving and the giving. And it can be just as satisfying to share that book with someone than to find 5 more shelves to put 100 more books. So that's what I've got for you today, my friend. Appreciate all of you. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for this community. Do me a huge favor. If you could like this video, that would do me a huge favor. If you are new here, please subscribe. Turn on your notification bell. Subscribe to my email list if you want to know when I'm going live and you want to know what offerings I have moving forward. That's always helpful. And then go visit me at spencermichaud.com if you want to book a reading. I would love to work with you in the future and hopefully be able to provide you with some guidance and just to, be able to witness your journey. I think that's one of the most important things that we do as astrologers is provide witness for other people's life and allow people to feel seen and heard in a way that is very difficult to achieve in other mediums. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Care about all of you. Have a great weekend. Try to navigate the Mars-Uranus conjunction with grace if you can. Take 1,000 deep breaths. Give yourself and other people around you extra space, and hopefully we'll all get through it together. So have a great time, and I will see you the next time. Remember, be kind to yourself, especially when we have some challenging aspects coming up, and be kind to others. It's much easier to move through life when you're practicing kindness, or at least attempting to do so. Okay, friends, that's what I've got for you. Have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.